absolutely delighted that we have Emily Molnar, and she is the artistic director of Nederlands Dans Theater. How's that for a little bit better? We are really excited to talk to Emily, so welcome, welcome. And you had some really interesting things to say about what it is to run a company in a little bit more, I think, interesting and innovative way. So just to get us started, can you give us a brief overview of your career, how you became an artistic director, and then your move to your current position?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I think I'm like not so unusual that I was a young child with a lot of energy. And so I found myself in creative movement class, thanks to I think my grandmother and my mother at about 5. And then I found ballet when I was 6, and I didn't know this until recently, but forced my mother to buy a pair of pointe shoes for me at 7. And then my teacher looked at me and said, if you're going to put those on, I'm going to train you. So at 7, I was in ballet every day on point, and I don't think I've been outside of the studio since, and I'm obviously a lot older than 7.
Wow. Wow, that's early.
That is very early. So that's why my teacher was obviously very smart in making sure I knew what I was doing. So the passion was there, Liza, from the very beginning. I gravitated towards movement immediately. It was my way of answering out the world. It still is. It felt like home. It felt important. It felt like things made sense when I was dancing, when I was in the studio. Yep. So I knew at that time I was living in central Canada, and I was in a very good school. Now I think kids have much more opportunities to decide where they're going to train. But when I was in this, young and 10, there really weren't that many options. So I found my way eventually to the National Ballet School. So I left home when I was 10. I graduated when I was 16. I moved into the National Ballet of Canada, actually through a process with William Forsythe, which became a world premiere, which became the second detail. So I danced for the National Ballet of Canada, loved it. I was obviously very, very much a dancer that appreciated the classical route of dance, but I was always extremely hungry for contemporary work. And I knew that already from a young age. I loved working with choreographers. I loved building ideas with people. I loved having that agency as a performer as well. So when I was in a ballet company, the National Ballet of Canada, and working with Bill, of course, stimulated me right away. 4 years later, he came back and offered me a job with Ballet Frankfurt. So at 21, I moved to Germany. I joined Ballet Frankfurt for a glorious 5 years of working with William, Forsythe, and his incredible way of thinking. He stimulated us so much as a group. I'm still learning from what I experienced at that time, and his ability to ask questions, to take risk, to keep us dancing one principle that's extremely important to him is that there's still joy, that you really, really enjoy. He's an incredibly intelligent man in the way he makes work, and he's a master of theater, but he is also first and foremost a dancer. It was so important that we all we still needed to dance. And I think one of the ways he would always kind of find that out in us is we'd work all day really hard on processes. But if we went, home later that night and went out dancing, he knew we were really the dancer, that we had to still dance even when we were left to
That's wonderful. Yeah. I often ask about classical dance, where did the fun go? Where did the joy go? Right? So much of it seems either very repetitive and forced, or let's get very, very dark, right? Let's put on dark costumes and dark lighting and dark, dark, dark. So the idea of fun and improvisation and joy, I think, which is what brings us to dance in the first place, is so important to continue through the professional career.
I think, ballet was created with a sense of this kind of wanting to lift off and expand into the supernatural, into something impossible. So there's a lot of freedom and grace and beauty within ballet training, but I think anything over time, when it gets studied and it gets passed on, it can start to feel pressured, not just ballet. So I think it's our job right now, for those of us in the profession, to keep asking the question of how do you make something, how do you re-enliven something, how do you redefine and refresh something that has existed for so many years. And I have that question for right now. because after I stopped dancing, I worked for Ballet Frankfurt, and then I moved back to Canada. I knew I wanted to take on more responsibilities, and eventually found myself as a director. And now working with Nederlands Dance Theater, a company that's been 60 years, very much at the forefront. What does innovation mean to us?
Yep.
Right? What does it mean to not assume because you were something you will remain that? How do you keep asking those questions? How do you keep learning for yourself as an organization and as an artist? Those are really important things to me.
So you've both in Canada and in the Netherlands, at least to some extent, there's support in through the government for art. We don't have that in the United States nearly to the same extent. And I sometimes wonder if our system in the United States impedes discovery, at least on a certain level, because people feel that they have to go for either what is going to bring in money or what is perceived as this is prestigious, right? This is what the canon is. And I've actually heard particularly executive directors say, well, we live in uncertain times, so we have to program what we know is going to bring in audiences.
So your question is it
So,
easier in Canada and
I'm asking, does that sound right to you? Would you, just a topic for reflection, do you think that might be the case? How do different systems, and you can compare if you want Canada to the Netherlands or what you know of the United States, how does being subsidized or not perhaps affect programming decisions, creative decisions?
It's a really important question, and I would say, just having worked in both systems as a performer, as a choreographer, and now as a director, there are pros and there are cons to both. And I would say an obvious, there's a sense of security because of history, and also because of the funding model that can offer a lot of people support that does, I think, free up the pressures. It's not a guarantee, though, for excellence. It's not because having to build something from scratch and having to find your funders and build those relationships with those sponsors and those donors does offer something. It can, if you don't sell yourself short, can also produce a very meaningful connection. And sometimes if you're just handed money and you don't realize that immediate kind of relationship building, so funding is just given, that can also create it can force you to stop asking certain questions. It can also mean that you can't move things as quickly sometimes. So, so this is what I mean, that there's pros and cons to both. But I would say that in an ideal world that I would imagine, one shouldn't ask whether they can be educated in any way. One shouldn't ask whether arts and culture are important or necessary. They just are. And so I think in a perfect world, there will be support, but I think it's also important that we have to keep engaging with describing why we're doing what we're doing. And that funding doesn't mean that we're not being asked questions as to what we need as artists, where do we want to go, and that we just take for granted that an audience will be there, because part of why we are a performing art is that we have an audience. And so we need to keep taking that responsibility. And sometimes that funding or non-funding model can force you to have to really ask those questions in a positive and not so positive way.
Yeah, I think that for me, having given to ballets and also working in other arts and cultural organizations, having artistic freedom is extremely important, but that connection to the audience and, having talkbacks and why are you doing what you're doing and really considering things is so important. So much of our audience in the United States is aging, and I do see whether it's ballet or theater or opera, going towards pleasing a small cadre of very influential, usually much older, very wealthy donors, in the hopes that they will enjoy seeing Carmen for the 50th time, which is great. I love Carmen too, but that working to pull in new audiences, telling stories, I think that they recognize is super important, or at least mixing it in a little bit.
I think that's also our job as directors or those of us in the field to keep, when you want to present to somebody, so an audience member, something they may not recognize, how do you pace that in your programming? How do you offer them something slightly new, but also something that is more known? How do you educate that conversation? Because these are super important questions, because also the audience is what is hopefully also helping us as artists develop. Their questions help us. And so but we also have to ask questions to help them understand how to look at the art form. So I would say that yeah, it's an ongoing work in progress.
Yeah. Something that struck me from our previous discussion, I've repeated it to a number of the participants in Global Conversations, was your quote that you feel like you're in the human potential business, which I think sounds it sounds thrilling and it sounds exhausting at the same time to live up to that.
Yeah, I guess yeah, I guess it depends on whether it's how you see purpose or how one builds intention in their lives. For me, when I was transitioning from Ballet Frankfurt, as I was 26, and I had a thought that kept kind of taking up my headspace, which is I just don't feel like I'm making a big enough difference as a performer individually. I knew the company that I belonged to did. There was something in me that just felt like it wasn't making sense. And this is where this human potential idea, I think, comes out for me, is I only get excited and I can only feel like I'm doing what I'm meant to do in this world if I'm thinking about something much bigger than just myself. And so when I think of human potential, it's not for me to control in any way. It's just, I get super excited when I see people find new ideas or discover something for themselves. I get excited for myself, but I get as excited when I see someone else finding that out. And so so that's what I mean about human potential. It's everywhere all the time. You get on a bus, you go into a coffee shop, you walk into a dance studio. When you see you can see people growing when they have conversation and they ask questions and they go towards something they're interested in and they learn more about it. I mean, this just watching people grow, watching people take steps and supporting that. That's what I mean by human potential. It's not that we all want the same thing or we're all going to go to the same place. Sure. Not at all. It's about process. It's about.
To me, it's a very thrilling, very exciting, brilliant idea, but that means you can't just have a meeting. You have to constantly be, or a performance. To me, that sounds like you're constantly questioning not only what you're seeing, hearing, and feeling, but what everybody else in the room is experiencing.
Yeah, I can see how you might see it that way. I feel more like that it should actually take away pressure, not add pressure. It's more that yes, we are in the business of making art, but sometimes that becomes so overwhelming actually, and that everything has to be about this next piece. And at some point it's like, what does success mean? Who are we? What wakes us up in the morning? Why? And it can be that just daring to try something physically that day is a huge success. And maybe the piece doesn't turn out to be a masterwork. That's okay. But that to me is a moment of human potential, of like, it's about putting the value system back in process versus just product. It's about watching people develop as human beings and giving themselves a chance to trust themselves and trust their environments. It's I think the essence, I think, of what's the undercurrent of living. And to me, that's where it gets juicy. And dance is a great vehicle for that because it asks so much of us, but it's everywhere, like I said, all the time. It's in how you smile to a bus driver. It's how you say hello.
I mean, that resonates with me. That's why I started Dance Data Project, is because I felt that so many people, so many brilliant minds, so many women, had ideas, had art in them that other people should see, that just wasn't getting out there, right? And it can only benefit the art form by if you have more interesting new voices suggesting, talking, creating together. That leads right into my next question, which is, when you started the company, I understand you brought dancers in for a meeting. And can you talk a little bit about that meeting? And I'm sure it was just the first of many.
Yeah, it was back when I had taken over a company in Vancouver called Ballet at that time British Columbia, and later known as Ballet BC. I really wanted to change the culture from within. It was a company that was in bankruptcy protection. There was a lot of there was a lot shifting, and there was a lot of unknowns around the company. One, just economically, whether it could survive. The dancers had been put on layoff from one day to the next. I mean, there were a lot of things that were really, really hard for everyone around. So one of the things I wanted to do was start with, I didn't have a big budget. What I had were a group of dancers who cared. I didn't even have a program. I had nothing in front of me, but I knew I had these individuals. And what I needed to do was, this is where another thing that has always stayed with me too, is that quality our standard does not equal money, and money doesn't equal standard. So I knew that if I could develop a quality conversation with these artists, whether we had a light bulb on stage or we were dancing in a studio with an audience, it wasn't about everything around it. It was about how we were going to be as a group. And if we could meet together on that agreement, we could start to make interesting art. Because I knew they had a certain expertise, but I needed them to show up as full human, committed human beings. And so I also found in my lifetime as a dancer that I was urging myself to learn how to communicate more, and we were being asked to also have more agency as performers in the studio. Yes. And I think that has to resonate throughout how we're giving feedback, how we're coaching, how we're rehearsing a dancer, how we're talking as a group within a studio. So one of the things I did was purposely take the dancers not into the studio and I sit on a chair and they sit on a floor, was to equal the ground, to make it that we were all adults having a conversation. I put us at a board table and I just said, listen, I've got this many hours in a day. You may not always work that much. I'm going to work it. Why? Because I'm going to bring so many new choreographers and new works to you. You're going to want that time because there's going to be so many different styles. I'm going to ask a lot of questions because that's who I am. I'm going to ask you to collaborate because that's what I believe in. If we're going to make something new here, we're going to need this. I'm also not going to tell you what you're not so you can prove me wrong. It's really going to be, if you want this and you go there with me, I will do everything to support you, and so will the company. And that might be harder for you than easier. And I said, this is what I want to do. And I totally get it if it's not what you want, but just please know if it's not what you want, let this be an opportunity someone else can have.
That is so fantastic. It's unbelievable. Who would not want that? I
don't know. I think sometimes it's a very challenging thing, I think, in life. When you say anything is possible, for some people, that's really, like you said about the human potential question, that can be really daunting. But for some people, they get really excited. And I think what I've been learning along the way now as a director is we have such a beautiful, fragile art form. It takes everything. And when we're so vulnerable, and that's such a beautiful thing. But it does require some very complex and expertise to navigate through from everybody. And I don't think sometimes it's easier. It's easier to get results when you just tell someone what to do. Sure. I'm not interested in that, and I don't think many of us voting for any new government is asking for that either. That's why dictatorships, are not why we're fighting for democracy. But I will say democracy is really, really hard, as we know. And so, but I will say, and I've said this to you before, I do think that by nature, by its natural kind of being, dance is community-based. We do not have to speak the same language. We can give our body weight to somebody within minutes and laugh and make a work with them. We build connection quickly and we open ourselves up. Dance is by nature a democratic act, and it's one of the most beautiful metaphors, I think, of how we can work as a society. We're resilient in the studio, we are adaptive, we ask questions. We've got a lot to learn from dance as an art form.
It's very interesting what you just said. Dance is by nature very democratic, because we don't see that as much in ballet. And I do think the focus on I need a result right now, or I want a certain body type kind of cuts against that. But I'm of course wondering if that process informs how you work as a choreographer, because it sounds much more like the wonderful women we interviewed in round one, and I asked them to talk about their process. And for the most part, that's exactly what you're talking about, is what they said. I mean, one of our interview subjects said the most exciting time for me is as I walk into the studio for the first time and I see all those wonderful dancers and the potential of what could be.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's why we do it. And it's this, I mean, that's one of the things that we grapple with as human beings, but it's one of the most beautiful things. We really don't know what's going to happen the next second. And every time we go to make a work of art, we are giving ourselves over to the unknown, and we are trusting it, and we are saying, let's go for it. And it's a joyous process. And we do that every day, all the time when we're making art. That creative process is trusting the unknown. And it's, if I think that's what many of us in life, work towards trusting in our, spiritual paths. But it's like, that's what an artist does all the time. You have to believe in something before it's there. You have to imagine it before it actually comes to life. So you have to see it before it is.
Yes. And I would also argue that's true of anything you undertake as an entrepreneur.
Anything that's creative. That's what creativity is.
Yeah, it's like crossing your fingers, crossing every body part, and hoping the universe will respond to what your vision is.
But that's also where, it's not exclusive to dance. It's to any, but this is why I say I'm interested in human potential, because it's where you say this isn't just dance oriented, this is actually humanity oriented. I think that gets fascinating.
With a solid basis in either customer service or ballet training or whatever it is.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Forward, because that trust has to be built on solid techniques so people don't get hurt, and that's the other obligation.
Well, yeah, I mean, the minute you say something's going to be about excellence, you're already defining something in a different way, right?
Okay, so redefine it then as good, strong training so the body isn't injured by the process, and that the person can develop, as you said, to their fullest potential.
Well, and there are people, all of us dance, not all of us try to make a profession out of it. So that's where, like, I mean, what I'm talking about obviously can apply to anybody that wants to move or be creative. What happens when you start to put the rigor of excellence inside of that? How do you keep that sense of play and curiosity and not feel pressured by the wanting to be excellent at something? That is the nuance of being a great artist, where you don't let one become more powerful than the other, that you do, that there is, that relationship is a really interesting place.
Or a great teacher too, I think, to keep that sense of joy flowing in the studio. It sounds like the Netherlands was a little less shut down than some other parts of the world. We're doing this interview mid-March 2021. Where are you? Where is the Netherlands now?
We have been luckier than I think other places of the world, you're right. We have had to deal with restrictions and distance and stuff, but the dancers can make contact as needed within the work. So that's given us the ability to still perform, just that we're not right now dealing with houses, full houses of audiences. So although the dancers can touch and we can make work, we have to keep our technical crew at a distance from them. We're not allowed to have audiences in right now. So we've been able to build work. We've been doing a lot of live streaming, which has been phenomenal for lots of reasons. One, it's a type of new touring. I'm not saying that this is going to stay all the time, but for us right now, it's created still a live experience. We've reached, in our last live stream, almost between 8,000 and 10,000 people. And some of those links are, there's 2 people on there. So that could be doubled in some way to 18,000.
Yeah.
63 countries, but also creatively. I mean, in our last work, we did a world premiere with Hovis Schechter, and he actually gave a gimbal camera to a dancer who used to perform with us, Lucas Timmerlek, and he actually was going through the piece with the camera, so it gave a whole other angle on the piece. It felt like you were a performer inside.
That's really cool.
And so the live streaming, this kind of thing that would never have probably been something we could have done in our normal routine, because we're so busy touring and so busy making and so busy performing, and because we're usually doing about between the 2 companies around 160 shows a year, either in the Netherlands or on
that's extraordinary.
Yeah, it's about 80-ish between the 2 companies each. So that doesn't leave a lot of room for us to change that model. But in this year, we've been able to do that. So the live streaming was one. We've also done some great things where we've just said, listen, what do we want to learn? What do we want to research? We've not usually been able to. So We just did a whole group of theater workshops with the International Theater Amsterdam on the use of text and also just presence and coaching of that. We've brought in artists around the Netherlands to come teach us, to share their practice with us. Anyone from like instant composition with Michael Schumacher, who built a site-specific work, or we also had Radwan, who was here teaching us more from an urban background. So, and also we had this other beautiful hip hop artist that came. So we've been trying to diversify and gather tools that we can then take forward into next season or whenever, whatever process we're in. But we also did things where we just said, okay, we're reframing every program to make it work in this context. And we ended up being able to do a whole new evening with Joan Bourgeois, which saw the dancers working at 4 meters high, upside down, talking and moving, and all that. I mean, we just had our whole brains kind of be, challenged about like, what does this mean for us? It was like a movement poem. So we've really been adaptive, and it hasn't been easy. I mean, every day is like a new thing to puzzle. But I would say it's, I think when we look back, we're going to be happy that we use this time in the most resourceful way, but it has been extremely hard for our profession. We were one of the first, I think, to get hit so hard that we just, everything about what we do is about making contact, either physically with audiences. It's just, we were really shut down. And so other parts of the world have been even more affected by this. Yeah. But in the Netherlands, there's been this idea that we are essential workers and top sports, top sporters, or elite athletes has really helped, that they recognize that. It has put us in a category that has enabled us to continue to do our work. And that means a lot, that we have that kind of recognition from the government. And also that there's been an aid package financially to help support us through this. So back to one of your first questions, that gives us a lot of breathing room to do the things I just mentioned to you. Not everybody has that opportunity. So. Because in the United States, the Dancer Choreographers Bureau of Labor Statistics, the dance has been the hardest hit during the pandemic. It's dancer choreographers as a profession skew younger, they skew female, they live closer to the poverty line, and it's just been devastating here. Particularly, I think, for those not attached to companies who are, freelancer and gig, because there's that whole very vulnerable side of ballet companies with, a lot of very, very talented people. I think it's here too. The freelancers have been absolutely hit in a different way than companies. I would agree. Yeah. Is there anything in specific that the company's doing coming up that you want to talk about? We have this week, we have another live stream, a work of Yuri Kilian's. We are very excited to have Yuri in the studio with us, 2752. And then Marco Gucca has a brand new piece. I think those are both, it's with NDT2, so it's our younger company. So that will be there. And then also Damian Jallet has a new full-length work that we're premiering in May. So I think that's also going to be a very special process. So those are the two things that we're looking forward to. So it would be great if people want to connect. Those are for everybody around the world. Barreling ahead into that uncertain, joyful future. I want to thank you so very much, Emily Molnar. It's been absolutely delightful to speak with you. We're so excited to see what's coming for you and for the company and all the potential that you're going to bring out in these wonderful artists. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.